It is said that Moon staggered through half the camp, lurching from campfire to campfire in pursuit of the doxy who had cut him. Finally even his great strength failed him, he collapsed and died as his acolytes pressed around him, wailing their grief. Of his slayer there was no sign, she had vanished into the night, never to be seen again. Angry poor fellows tore the camp apart for a day and a night in search of her, knocking over tents, seizing dozens of women, and beating any man who tried to stand in their way. But the hunt came up empty. Septon Moon's own guards could not even agree on what his killer had looked like. The guards did recall that the woman had brought a flagon of wine with her as a gift for the Septon. Half the wine still remained in the flagon when the tent was searched, and 4 of the poor fellows shared it as the sun was coming up, after carrying the corpse of their prophet back to his own bed. All 4 were dead before noon. The wine had been laced with poison. In the aftermath of Moon's death, the ragged host that he had led to Aldtown began to disintegrate. Some of his followers had already slipped away when word of King Maegor's death and Prince Jaehaerys' ascension reached them. Now the trickle became a flood. Before the Septon's corpse had even begun to stink, a dozen rivals had come forward to claim his mantle, and fights began to break out amongst their respective followers. It might have been thought that Moon's men would turn to the 2 lords amongst them for leadership, but nothing could be further from the truth. The poor fellows especially were no respecters of nobility. And the reluctance of Lords Rowan and Oakhart to commit their knights and men at arms to an assault on the walls of Aldtown had made them suspicious of the 2 lords. The possession of Moon's mortal remains became itself a bone of contention between 2 of his would-be successors, the poor fellow known as Rob the Starveling and a certain Lorcas, called Lorcas the Learned, who boasted of having committed all of the 7-pointed star to memory. Lorcas claimed to have had a vision that Moon would yet deliver Aldtown into the hands of his followers, even after death. After seizing the Septon's body from Rob the Starveling, this learned fool strapped it atop a destrier, naked, bloody, and rotting, to storm the gates of Aldtown. Fewer than 100 men joined in the attack, however, and most of them died beneath a rain of arrows, spears, and stones before they got within 100 yards of the city walls. Those who did reach the walls were drenched in boiling oil or set afire with burning pitch, Lorcas the Learned himself amongst them. When all his men were dead or dying, a dozen of Lord Hightower's boldest knights rode forth from a sally port, seized Septon Moon's body, and removed his head. Tanned and stuffed, it would later be presented to the High Septon in the Starry Sept as a gift. The abortive attack proved to be the last gasp of Septon Moon's crusade. Lord Rowan decamped within the hour, with all his knights and men at arms. Lord Oakhart followed the next day. The remainder of the host, hedge knights and poor fellows and camp followers and tradesmen, streamed away in all directions, looting and pillaging every farm, village, and holdfast in their path as they went. Fewer than 400 remained of the 5,000 that Septon Moon had brought to Aldtown when Lord Donald the Delayer at last bestirred himself and rode forth in force to slaughter the stragglers. Moon's murder removed the last major obstacle to the accession of Jaehaerys Targaryen to the Iron Throne, but from that day to this, debate has raged as to who was responsible for his death. No one truly believed that the woman who attempted to poison the sinful Septon, and ended by cutting his throat was acting on her own. Plainly she was but a catspaw. But whose? Did the boy king himself send her forth, or was she mayhaps an agent of his hand, Rogar Baratheon, or his mother, the Queen Regent? Some came to believe that the woman was one of the Faceless Men, the infamous guild of sorcerer assassins from Braavos. In support of this claim, they cited her sudden disappearance, the way she seemed to melt into the night after the murder, and the fact that Septon Moon's guards could not agree on what she looked like. Wiser men and those more familiar with the ways of the Faceless Men give this theory little credence. The very clumsiness of Moon's murder speaks against it being their work, for the Faceless Men take great care to make their killings appear as natural deaths. It is a point of pride with them, the very cornerstone of their art. Slitting a man's throat and leaving him to stagger forth into the night screaming of murder is beneath them. Most scholars today believe that the killer was no more than a camp follower, acting at the behest of either Lord Rowan or Lord Oakhart, or mayhaps the both of them. Though neither dared desert Moon whilst he lived, the alacrity with which the 2 lords abandoned his cause after his death suggests that their grievance had been with Maegor, not with House Targaryen. And, indeed, both men would soon return to Aldtown, penitent and obedient, to bend the knee before Prince Jaehaerys at his coronation. With the way to Aldtown clear and safe once more, that coronation took place in the Starry Sept in the waning days of the 48th year after the conquest. The High Septon, the High Lickspittle that Septon Moon had hoped to displace, anointed the young king himself, and placed his father Ennis's crown upon his head. 7 days of feasting followed, during which hundreds of lords great and small came to bend their knees and swear their swords to Jaehaerys. Amongst those in attendance were his sisters, Rhaena and Alysanne, his young nieces, Arya and Rhaella, his mother, the Queen Regent Alyssa, the King's Hand, Rogar Baratheon, Sir Giles Morrigan, the Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, Grand Maester Benefer, the assembled Archmaesters of the Citadel. And one man no one could have expected to see. Sir Joffrey Doggett, the Red Dog of the Hills, self-proclaimed Grand Captain of the outlawed warriors' sons. Doggett had arrived in the company of Lord and Lady Tully of Riverrun. Not in chains, as most might have expected, but with a safe conduct bearing the king's own seal. Grand Maester Benefer wrote afterward that the meeting between the boy king and the outlaw knight set the table for all of Jaehaerys' reign to follow. When Sir Joffrey and Lady Lucinda urged him to undo his uncle Maegor's decrees and reinstate the swords and stars, Jaehaerys refused firmly. The faith has no need of swords, he declared. They have my protection. The protection of the Iron Throne. He did, however, rescind the bounties that Maegor had promised for the heads of warriors' sons and poor fellows. I shall not wage war against my own people, he said, but neither shall I tolerate treason and rebellion. I rose against your uncle just as you did, replied the Red Dog of the Hills, defiant. You did, Jaehaerys allowed, and you fought bravely, no man can deny. The warriors' sons are no more and your vows to them are at an end, but your service need not be. I have a place for you. And with these words, the young king shocked the court by offering Sir Joffrey a place by his side as a knight of the Kingsguard. A hush fell then, Grand Maester Benefer tells us, and when the Red Dog drew his longsword there were some who feared he might be about to attack the king with it. But instead the knight went to one knee, bowed his head, and laid his blade at Jaehaerys' feet. It is said that there were tears upon his cheeks. 9 days after the coronation, the young king departed Aldtown for King's Landing. Most of his court traveled with him in what became a grand pageant across the Reach. But his sister Rhaena stayed with them only as far as Highgarden, where she mounted her dragon, Dreamfire, to return to Fair Isle and Lord Farman's castle above the sea, taking her leave not only of the king, but of her daughters. Rhaella, a novice sworn to the faith, had remained at the Starry Sept, whilst her twin, Arya, continued on with the king to the Red Keep, where she was to serve as a cupbearer and companion to the Princess Alysanne. Yet a curious thing befell Queen Rhaena's girls after the king's coronation, it was observed. The twins had ever been mirror images of each other in appearance, but not in temperament. Whereas Rhaella was said to be a bold and willful child and a terror to the Septas who had been given charge of her, Arya had been known as a shy, timid creature, much given to tears and fears. She is frightened of horses, dogs, boys with loud voices, men with beards, and dancing, and she is terrified of dragons, Grand Maester Benefer wrote when Arya first came to court. That was before Maegor's fall and Jaehaerys' coronation, however. Afterward, the girl who remained at Aldtown devoted herself to prayer and study, and never again required chastisement, whereas the girl who returned to King's Landing proved to be lively, quick-witted, and adventurous, and was soon spending half her days in the kennels, festivals, and the dragon yards. Though nothing was ever proved, it was widely believed that someone Queen Rhaena herself, mayhaps, or her mother, Queen Alyssa had used the occasion of the king's coronation to switch the twins. If so, no one was inclined to question the deception, for until such time as Jaehaerys sired an heir of the body, Princess Arya, or the girl who now bore that name, was the heir to the Iron Throne. All reports agree that the king's return from Aldtown to King's Landing was a triumph. Sir Joffrey rode by his side, and all along the route they were hailed by cheering throngs. Here and there poor fellows appeared, gaunt unwashed fellows with long beards and great axes, to beg for the same clemency that had been granted the Red Dog. This Jaehaerys granted them, on the condition that they agreed to journey north and join the Night's Watch at the Wall. Hundreds swore to do so, amongst them no less a personage than Robb the Starveling. Within a moon's turn of being crowned, Grand Maester Benefer wrote, King Jaehaerys had reconciled the Iron Throne to the faith and put an end to the bloodshed that had troubled the reigns of his uncle and father.